There is a photograph from 1993 that bodybuilding insiders have continued to circulate for decades. In it, a 28-year-old man stands on stage with a physique so precisely constructed that even his rivals went silent when they saw it. Muscle layered on muscle, clean lines throughout, no visible weakness from head to toe. Arnold Schwarzenegger said he was one of the greatest bodybuilders he had ever seen. Ronnie Coleman, the man who would go on to win 8 Mr. Olympia titles, said he was the single best competitor he had ever faced. The man in that photograph was Flex Wheeler. The question his story raises is not whether he was exceptional, it is what it costs a human being to reach that level, and what happens when the body that carried him there begins to break down, progressively and without reprieve. By the time Flex Wheeler turned 60, he had undergone nearly 600 surgeries. He had lost part of his leg. His doctors had warned him he could lose additional limbs, and he had spoken on camera through all of it, every surgery, every recovery, every moment of uncertainty, saying he had no regrets. His story extends well beyond bodybuilding. It is a record of what a person is made of when everything external is taken away. Fresno, California. Kenneth Wheeler was born there on August 23rd, into circumstances that offered little margin for error. His mother raised him with almost no resources. There were periods in his childhood without a permanent home, and periods when food was not reliable. Inside the home, there was abuse. Wheeler has written about being molested as a child, not incidentally, but as a central subject in his biography. Flexibility, a story of strength and survival, specifically so that others with similar experiences would know they were not alone. That kind of trauma does not resolve on its own. It shapes how a child understands himself, how he moves through the world, whether he believes he belongs in it. For Wheeler, it contributed to serious suicidal ideation in his teenage years, something he has addressed directly in interviews, not as a passing detail, but as a defining period in his life. He also had dyslexia. School was difficult. Letters moved on the page. Reading was a struggle. And in a classroom with little accommodation for a kid from a poor family who couldn't keep up, the social environment was hostile. He was misunderstood and largely dismissed. The gym offered something different. The path to the gym started with martial arts. He discovered it as a young teenager, and the discipline, the physical demand, and the confidence it built took hold immediately. Before his bodybuilding career began, he had compiled a record of more than 70 undefeated fights in martial arts competition. He consistently identified as a martial artist first, and a bodybuilder second. At 13, he came across a bodybuilding magazine, and what he saw in it changed his direction. He walked into a weight room and did not leave it. After finishing school, he spent a brief period working as a police officer before concluding that his future was in competitive bodybuilding. He entered his first competition in 1983. By 1989, he had won the NPC Mr. California Championship. The rise that followed was one that even skeptical observers in the sport had difficulty dismissing. When Flex Wheeler made his IFBB professional debut in 1993, the bodybuilding world was not ready for him. He did not just compete that year, he dominated. In a single calendar year, he won the Ironman Pro Invitational, the Arnold Classic, the German Grand Prix, and the French Grand Prix. 4 major titles in 1 year, in a debut season. He also placed second at the Mr. Olympia, narrowly missing the sport's most prestigious title in the first Olympia he ever entered. The bodybuilding community responded the way it tends to when something genuinely unprecedented occurs, with a mix of awe and disbelief. What set Flex apart was not simply size or conditioning. Many men had been big and lean. What Flex possessed was something that could not be produced through training or diet alone. His symmetry was at a level the sport had rarely seen. Every muscle group was proportional to every other. His waist was remarkably small for a man carrying that much upper body mass. His lines were fluid. His posing was shaped by a martial arts background, which gave him a quality of movement on stage that most competitors lacked. He could perform a full split, the origin of his nickname. The combination produced a physique that even experienced eyes found difficult to fully assess. He was called the Sultan of Symmetry, and it was not flattery. It was an accurate description. He went on to win the Arnold Classic 4 times, a record at the time. He placed in the top 5 at the Mr. Olympia on 8 occasions. He won the Ironman Pro 5 times. He collected titles at the French Grand Prix, the Hungarian Grand Prix, the South Beach Pro Invitational, and the Night of Champions. His professional record stood at 16 wins from 33 competitions. But the one title that never came, and that followed him throughout his career and beyond, was the Mr. Olympia. He finished second 3 times, in 1993, 1998, and 1999. The debate over why he never won that title has not faded in the decades since. Many who were present in that era believed the judging did not favor his aesthetic, that the Olympia at the time rewarded a different standard of mass, and that Flex's physique, for all its precision, was somehow penalized for being too refined. Ronnie Coleman, who defeated him twice for the title, has said openly that Flex was the best competitor he ever faced. It is the kind of statement that invites scrutiny because if the strongest opponent you ever met could not win the Olympia, it raises questions about what the Olympia was actually measuring. Fans gave Flex an informal title in response. They called him the Uncrowned Mr. Olympia. That designation, loaded as it is, may be the one that endures longest. There is also something Flex himself said years later that reframes the question. In a June 2025 interview, he stated that he would not be alive today if he had won the Mr. Olympia. He meant it literally. He believed that winning the sport's top title would have driven him further into the lifestyle, the training demands, the substance use, the sustained pressure of holding that position, and that the accumulation would have destroyed him faster than the illness that was already developing inside him. In his view, losing the Olympia may have extended his life. In 1994, Flex Wheeler was at or near the height of his career. He was one of the most prominent athletes in the sport, his trajectory was upward, and his professional standing was secure. Then came the car accident. The details are difficult to recount plainly. His vehicle flipped. In the crash, he fractured his C5 and C6 vertebrae, the same vertebrae whose fracture left Christopher Reeve paralyzed. His collarbone shattered. His ear was nearly severed. His eye was nearly displaced from its socket. He was treated as a trauma case, and medical staff who attended to him that day reportedly did not know whether he would survive the night, let alone recover full use of his limbs. The doctors told him directly that he might never walk again. For a man whose entire identity had been built around physical capability, whose body was his livelihood, his craft, and his defense against a world that had been harsh to him since childhood, that prognosis carried a weight that extended well beyond the physical. He had already come through abuse, poverty, homelessness, and the lasting damage of a difficult early life. He had constructed everything he had from nothing. A single night on the road had put all of it in jeopardy. He returned to training. He worked through the pain, through the depression that followed the accident, through the sustained uncertainty of recovery, and he came back to competition faster than most people in the sport considered possible. Within a few years, he was on stage again, competing at the highest level, contending with Ronnie Coleman for the Mr. Olympia title. The comeback from that accident alone would have been sufficient to define most careers. For Flex Wheeler, it was one chapter in a longer struggle. In 1999, at what should have been the peak of his career, Flex Wheeler received a diagnosis that would reshape the rest of his life. The condition was focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, FSGS, a hereditary kidney disease. His kidneys were failing. The bodybuilding press was quick to draw conclusions. The prevailing assumption was that decades of performance-enhancing drug use had caused the damage. Wheeler disputed this directly. He acknowledged that certain substances may have accelerated the disease's progression, but maintained that the condition was genetic, present in his family, and one that would have eventually manifested regardless of his sport or the substances he used to compete in it. Medical professionals who reviewed his full history largely supported that assessment, identifying the hereditary component as the primary driver. He continued competing. He won the Arnold Classic again in 2000, announced his retirement, and then kept competing. The disease continued to progress. By 2003, his kidneys were no longer functioning adequately, and he underwent a full transplant. The donor was a woman named Risa, who Wheeler has said chose to donate in part because his children were still young, and she did not want them to grow up without their father. Risa passed away in 2020. It is one of the few subjects Wheeler has never been able to discuss without visible emotion. He retired from the open division following the 2003 Olympia, where he placed 6th. In the years that followed, he returned to martial arts, specifically Kemp Kwan-do, a hybrid of Kempo, Taekwondo, and Aikido he had practiced since youth. He served as director of media and public relations for the nutrition company All-American EFX, trained athletes and built a public following outside competitive bodybuilding. In 2017, at the age of 52, with a transplanted kidney and years of accumulated medical complications, Wheeler returned to the Mr. Olympia stage, competing in the classic physique division. He placed 15th. By competitive measure, the result was modest, but his presence on that stage, healthy enough to compete at 52, drew a genuine response from the audience. He was not competing to win. He was competing to demonstrate that he still could. What was not publicly known at the time, and what Sean Ray later confirmed in interviews, was that Wheeler had been managing serious, escalating pain for years before that appearance. The circulation in his right leg had been deteriorating well before it became a public issue. He had been through hospitalizations that received no press coverage. At one point, he was placed in an induced coma for 3 months while doctors attempted vein realignment surgery to address the circulatory deterioration. He continued to appear publicly throughout that period, still competing, still training, while managing a medical situation that was beyond what willpower alone could resolve. The crisis had been building for years, but its final stage moved quickly. Beginning in 2019, Wheeler made repeated hospital visits for worsening circulation in his right leg. The pain had surpassed what had previously been manageable. Doctors explored every available option to preserve the limb. When those options were exhausted and the circulatory failure had become life-threatening, the decision was made to remove the lower portion of the leg. On October 20, 2019, Flex Wheeler underwent emergency amputation of his right leg below the knee. He described the decision as the most difficult he had ever faced, harder, in some respects, than the car accident that had nearly killed him, because this time there was no path to recovery. The loss was permanent. The response from the bodybuilding community reflected the regard in which he was held across generations of the sport. Jay Cutler, a 4-time Mr. Olympia, posted publicly wishing him a full recovery. Phil Heath, a 7-time Olympia champion, expressed his support directly. Sean Ray, a direct competitor of Wheeler's for years and a figure on the opposing side of considerable competitive history, described the news as very sad and humbling, and stated plainly that Wheeler was among the best the sport had ever produced. The amputation came just weeks after Wheeler had celebrated the birth of his grandson, Messiah Amir Bell. The recovery that followed presented a different kind of difficulty than the surgery itself. Wheeler had to relearn basic daily functions, getting into and out of a bathtub, washing himself, driving a car. Tasks that had required no conscious thought for decades had to be approached and learned again from the beginning. He documented the process on Instagram. One post from that period read, "I taught myself how to drive. I taught myself how to get in and out of the bathtub and wash myself. Not an easy task. Some things that all of you, including myself, take for granted. Just the easy things we do day to day. I taught myself how to live without a leg. Living this amputee life isn't easy but not impossible. I was built for this. Never let anyone or anything stop you or get in your way of living a joyful life of love and happiness. God is all I need." Wheeler shared that account not as performance but as a record, from someone who had been through a sustained medical crisis and had rebuilt a functional life on the other side of it, and was using that experience to speak directly to others who might be facing something comparable. The amputation was not the end of Flex Wheeler's medical history. It was a pause in it. In 2024, Wheeler shared in a social media post that in the 20 years since his kidney transplant, he had undergone approximately 600 surgeries. For most people, a single major surgery is a significant life event. For Wheeler, surgery had become a recurring condition of his existence, one he moved through repeatedly and kept going. The chronic pain accompanying that history presented its own set of complications. Wheeler has spoken openly about his experience with opiates, the standard approach for managing severe long-term pain. In his case, they did not simply fall short. He has described the hallucinations they produced, the effect they had on his mental state, and the version of himself they created, one he did not recognize. For a man who had lived with suicidal tendencies since adolescence, that mental territory carried serious risk. He found an alternative in Croton, a plant-based substance used by some for pain management. In an Instagram post in August 2024, he stated, "Croton has saved my life. Simple as that, and I'm proud and excited to continue using it." The statement reflects someone who had worked through the available options and settled on what he could tolerate. He was not editorializing. He was reporting a practical outcome. The most significant disclosure came when his doctor informed him that the disease responsible for destroying circulation in his right leg does not confine itself to one limb. It affects the arteries throughout the body. Wheeler was told he is now at risk of losing his left leg, his right arm, and his left arm. In a video interview where he shared this, he visibly struggled to hold his composure. "I'm at risk of losing my left leg. I'm at risk of losing my right arm, my left arm, because it attacks your limbs." He said it plainly, so that anyone watching would have the full picture. In 2025, Kenneth Wheeler turned 60 years old. That figure carries different weight when set against the full record of his life. 60 years from a childhood marked by poverty, abuse, and homelessness. 60 years from a near-fatal car accident that carried a realistic risk of paralysis. 60 years from kidney failure, a transplant, and a donor who did not live to see the outcome of her decision. 60 years from an amputation and from approximately 600 surgeries, a body that has been tested repeatedly and continues to be. He remains active. He coaches body transformation clients professionally. He has his own supplement line and hosts a podcast called Flex for Life. In 2023, he launched a regional bodybuilding competition in Mexico, the MGB Mexico Grand Battle. That same year, he received the Arnold Classic Lifetime Achievement Award at the 35th Arnold Sports Festival. Recognition delivered not as a ceremonial gesture, but as an acknowledgement of what his career and his arc have represented to the sport. His Instagram following approaches 1 million. Many of the people who follow him are not competitive athletes. They are people managing illness, disability, or the experience of losing something they considered permanent. They follow Wheeler not to look back at what he was, but to observe what he does with where he is now. In October 2025, he appeared on the Menace podcast and made the case that bodybuilders of his era competed in better condition than the athletes of today. More refined, more precise. He still engages with the sport and has clear views about its direction. The man who never won the Olympia has remained a consistent presence in the conversation surrounding it. The statement he made in June 2025, that he would not be alive today had he won the Olympia, is the one that most accurately captures how he has come to understand his own story. He did not say it with bitterness. He said it with something closer to settled understanding. The losses, as he sees them, made space for a life. And that life, however uncertain its next chapter, is one he has not finished. Most people who watched Flex Wheeler compete remember the physique, the lines, the symmetry, the quality that Arnold Schwarzenegger described but could not fully reduce to technical terms. That image, the stage presence, the body that seemed to exceed what was structurally possible, is the one most associated with his name. But the record of Flex Wheeler's life is not contained in any photograph. It is in a boy from Fresno who was hungry, homeless, and abused, and who decided to build something from that start. It is in a man who fractured his neck in a car accident and returned to competition, who lost a kidney and kept competing, who lost a leg and relearned how to drive, who has been told he may lose the rest of his limbs and has responded, consistently, with the same refusal to stop that carried him out of childhood. At 60, Wheeler is not what he was. No one could survive what he has survived and remain unchanged. But something present in that 1993 photograph has not left him, a refusal to be reduced, a belief, tested to its outer limits, that there is still something worth working toward on the other side of whatever comes next. The Sultan of Symmetry never received the Olympia trophy. What he has instead is a life that no trophy could have held, and he is still writing it.